He fired her on a Wednesday. Didn't look up from the mahogany conference table when he did it. Didn't say her name with any particular care. Just Miss Trent, clipped and final, the way he said the name of any inconvenience he was done with. Calla had been 18 minutes late with the due diligence package. To Alistair Pemberton, that was enough. 6 days later, he would watch surveillance footage from the underground parkade on level B2, and the oxygen would leave his chest the way it leaves a room when a window is suddenly broken. All at once, violently, without any warning at all. She had been lying flat on the oil-stained concrete beneath his armored Bentley, removing a pressure-triggered device from the steering column with her bare hands. Nothing more than a thumbnail and 3 years of muscle memory to guide her. She had wrapped the device in a paper bag from her desk drawer. She had walked it to the maintenance closet, locked it inside, washed the residue from her fingers in the parkade bathroom, straightened her blazer, and taken the elevator up to the 38th floor with the document package still tucked under her arm. 18 minutes. That was all it had cost her. And it had cost her everything. Bay Street in February is a particular kind of cold, not the honest, clean cold of the Shield country up north, but a wet, bitter thing that comes off Lake Ontario and finds every gap in your coat. Calla Trent had learned to dress for it in her first November at Pemberton Capital. A good wool blazer over a high-neck sweater, sensible low-heeled boots that she could walk fast in and that made almost no sound on the polished marble floors of the tower lobby. She had worked as Alistair Pemberton's senior financial analyst for 3 years. In those 3 years, she was reasonably certain he had looked directly at her face, perhaps 4 times. He had never asked where she was from. He had never noticed that she ate lunch at her desk without exception, that she took her coffee black, that the single-framed photograph she kept beside her monitor wasn't of a boyfriend or a family vacation, but of a young man in a hospital bed, grinning despite the IV in his arm. Her brother Dex, 26 years old, the only family she had left. Calla had built her invisibility carefully, the way you build a wall, one unremarkable brick at a time. Grey blazers, hair pulled back in a practical clip, no perfume, nothing that would leave any trace in a room after she had left it. She arrived at 7:15 every morning and stayed until Alistair's last meeting ended. She did not socialize with the associates on her floor. She did not give anyone a reason to look at her twice, and in 3 years, almost no one had. The one exception was Pemberton Capital's head of security, a blocky, quiet Newfoundlander named Rupert Crane. He'd worked for the family for 16 years, first for Arthur Pemberton and then for the son. Rupert noticed things. He noticed that Calla always found the exits when she entered a room. He noticed that she could read a situation before anyone else in it had caught up. He noticed, too, that when the underground parkade cameras went down for scheduled maintenance on the night of November 14th, she had filed a quiet maintenance request the very next morning. He had never said anything about it. He just watched. The meeting that ended Calla's employment was supposed to be routine. Alistair was finalizing a partnership agreement with Torrance Kell, a Vancouver-based financier who had spent 2 years quietly buying influence along the Pacific Corridor in the room. Kell and 2 of his lawyers, Alistair and 3 of his own. Documents needed. Calla was the one who always prepared them. At 2:06 p.m., she left the 38th floor to retrieve the final sealed package from the courier lockbox in the lower lobby. She took the elevator down to level B2 first, because she had noticed something that morning. A white cargo van she didn't recognize, parked in a visitor bay it wasn't authorized to use. It had been there since 7 a.m. She had logged it. She had watched it on the desk monitor through the entire morning. At 1:58 p.m. it had moved. The man beneath Alistair's Bentley didn't hear her coming. He was experienced, working quickly, using magnetic clamps that would leave no residue on the chassis. But Calla had been trained by people who were considerably better than him, and she had not forgotten a single thing they taught her. She didn't give him a chance to reach for the tool bag beside his knee. What followed lasted 45 seconds. When it was over, the man was secured to a support column with his own jacket sleeves, and the device was in Calla's hands. She left him there, conscious and furious, and took the stairs to the lobby. She retrieved the documents. She smoothed her blazer in the elevator mirror and breathed out once, slow and measured, the way she always did after. She was 18 minutes late. Alistair Pemberton's office occupied the north corner of the 38th floor, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the lake on one side and the tower grid of the financial district on the other. He ran his empire from behind a desk that had belonged to his father before him, dark walnut, scarred at one corner where Arthur Pemberton had, by family legend, once thrown a paperweight at a man who tried to shortchange him. Calla had stood in front of that desk hundreds of times. She had never once been afraid of him. Not of the coldness in his grey eyes, not of the reputation that preceded him. The man who had consolidated 3 failing companies in 18 months, who had restructured his own board without raising his voice. She had simply understood him, the architecture of a man who trusted nothing he couldn't verify. He was standing when she entered. The meeting had been adjourned. Kell and his lawyers were gone. Alistair was at the window with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, letting the silence do what he wanted it to do. She set the package on the desk. He turned. He was, she noticed, with the part of her that noticed everything, looking at his watch, timing it deliberately. 18 minutes, he said. Calla said nothing. Kell was watching every detail. The documents weren't in front of him when he expected them to be, and every minute he waited was a minute he spent deciding whether I was worth his time. Alistair's voice was even, measured, the voice of a man who had long since stopped needing to raise it. Do you understand what that costs? Yes, because she did. I don't think you do. He moved to his desk and placed an envelope on the wood between them. 3 months severance. HR will send the paperwork by end of day. She looked at the envelope. She looked at the document package she had just set down. She thought about Dex, about what 3 months without a salary meant when his treatments cost what they cost, about the look on his face in the photograph, still grinning despite everything. She picked up the envelope. I understand, she said. Her voice did not waver. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Pemberton. She turned and walked out, and he said nothing, because he had already stopped thinking about her before the door had finished closing. In the bullpen, she returned to her desk and opened the bottom drawer. From it, she took the only things that were truly hers, the photograph of Dex, a small USB drive she tucked into her coat pocket, and a black notebook with her initials pressed into the cover. She placed them in the canvas tote she kept folded at the back of the drawer. She shut the computer down, removing nothing else, leaving everything precisely as she had found it 3 years ago. Rupert Crane appeared at the corner of the partition, holding his coffee mug. He looked at the tote bag. He looked at her face. Moving desks, he said. Moving on, said Calla. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw worked the way it did when he was processing something he didn't want to say aloud. He let you go. He terminated my contract. Over the documents. Over being late with them. She began to straighten the already straight items on her desk surface, a habit she recognized as displacement and couldn't quite stop. Make sure someone checks the level B2 support columns near Bay 14. There's a man zip-tied to one of them. He'll need to be processed. A pause. And have the Bentley swept before Mr. Pemberton drives it tomorrow. Rupert stared at her. Goodbye, Rupert, she said. She walked to the elevator. The doors opened immediately, as if the building itself knew she needed to leave cleanly, without lingering. She stepped in. The doors closed. In the corridor behind her, Rupert Crane stood holding his coffee mug and said nothing to anyone, because he didn't yet have the language for what he had just understood. By Friday, the absence of Calla Trent was a structural problem disguised as an inconvenience. The associate HR had sent up, misfiled a regulatory brief, admitted 2 calls from unverified numbers, and forgot the oat milk in his coffee, which was printed on the intake form she'd been given. By Thursday afternoon, Alistair had stopped noticing the specific errors and had started noticing something less definable. A looseness in the building, an exposure he couldn't locate, the sensation of a door left unlatched somewhere he couldn't find. On Saturday morning, he walked out to the bullpen and stood at her workstation. He didn't know what he was looking for. He opened the drawers empty, spotless. The bottom left drawer wouldn't open. Locked still, the key gone with HR. He found a letter opener. He pried. The wood splintered with a dry, flat crack that echoed in the empty office. Inside was a second notebook, thinner than the one she'd taken. He opened it. The handwriting was small and precise, without personality. The handwriting of someone who had trained themselves to leave as little trace as possible in everything they did. October 3, Torrance Kell's lead counsel, Farris, met with an associate of the Westbrook Syndicate at the Fairmont Bar, 7 p.m., 15 minutes. Cash payment, flagged. October 19, black sedan, plates unregistered to any known corporate fleet, circled the Bay Street Tower 3 times between 11 a.m. and noon. Driver photographed via lobby cam. Archived, file K11. November 14, white cargo van, partial plate BCR4, restricted Bay B2 from 7:02 a.m. unregistered visitor. Device identified at 1:58 p.m. neutralized. Perpetrator detained level B2, Bay 14. Note, Bentley requires full sweep before operation. He read the last entry 3 times. Then he called Rupert Crane. The security suite on the 37th floor hummed with server fans and cold air. Rupert was already there when Alistair came down, standing beside the tech analyst, a pale, overworked young man named Parnell, who pulled up the file on the central monitor without making eye contact. "She told me to check the parkade when she left Wednesday," Rupert said. "We found the man, had him processed. I assumed it was separate from her dismissal." A pause. "I shouldn't have assumed." A timestamp. Wednesday, 1:58 p.m. level B2. Alistair watched Calla walk into the frame in her grey blazer and sensible boots, canvas tote at her shoulder, precisely as she had looked every single ordinary day for 3 years. He watched her pause at the Bentley. He watched her crouch and then lower herself flat to the concrete. What happened next lasted 45 seconds and rearranged something fundamental in Alistair Pemberton's understanding of the world he thought he controlled. The man under the vehicle was twice her size. He came out swinging. She moved into the strike, not away from it, and used his momentum to drive him into the SUV beside the Bentley with enough force to dent the door panel. When he reached for his jacket, she was already there. She had his arm locked and his balance broken before he finished the reach. The zip ties appeared from her tote bag, with the efficiency of something rehearsed many hundreds of times. She retrieved the device. She examined it. She wrapped it in a paper bag. She straightened her blazer. She breathed out once. She walked away. The timestamp read 2:14 p.m. Rupert's voice was quiet. She was 18 minutes late, because she spent those 18 minutes stopping someone from killing you. Alistair did not move. "And you fired her for it," Rupert said. Not as an accusation, just as the plain fact of it, stated aloud so it could become real. On the monitor, Calla Trent disappeared into the stairwell, carrying a device she had never mentioned, protecting a man who had never once looked at her face properly, and still with the document package under her arm. "Find her," Alistair said. It took Rupert 36 hours. She had surrendered her apartment, lease broken, paid out in cash. Her background file, when examined properly, was a construction. The social insurance number traced back to a woman who had relocated to Prince Edward Island years ago and had never heard of anyone called Calla Trent. The references were dead lines. The credentials were sophisticated forgeries. She was in the most complete sense a ghost. But she had paid cash at a camping supply store on Lake Shore West Thursday morning, and the owner remembered her because she had asked precise questions about thermal-rated locks and portable water filtration. He had pointed her toward a conservation area north of the city, where crown land ran thick with second-growth maple and cedar, and a decommissioned forestry access road led to a cluster of private storage lockups that had changed hands off-record years ago. Alistair drove out himself. He took Rupert. He didn't explain why he needed to be there personally, and Rupert had the good sense not to ask. She heard them coming. Not the car. She'd killed the road light 200 meters back, and the turnoff was unmarked. But she had set sensors along the access path because she always set sensors. Because 3 years behind a desk had not changed the part of her that never fully stopped watching the perimeter. When the alert registered on the device clipped to her belt, Calla moved to the lock-up door and looked through the gap. One vehicle, 2 figures, one of whom she recognized by his posture alone, the particular way he carried himself, like a man who expected the ground to hold, regardless of what was under it. She stepped out. Alistair Pemberton stopped 5 meters away, and his breath came out of him visibly in the winter air. She was not wearing a grey blazer, dark canvas jacket, practical trousers, boots built for grip. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. He had never seen it that way. It made her look different, less constructed, more like herself. "You're compromising my exit timeline, Mr. Pemberton," she said, which was not what she had intended to say. Old reflex, the words of a different version of her. Rupert stayed by the vehicle. He looked like a man who had suspected something for a long time and was now seeing the confirmation of it, and hadn't yet decided how to feel about having been right. "Who are you?" Alistair said. "You know who I am. Your file is fabricated. Calla Trent doesn't exist." "She does," Calla said. "She's just not who you thought she was." The conservation land was quiet around them, bare maples, a sky going grey with early dusk, the smell of frozen earth and cedar. "Who sent you?" His voice was stripped of its boardroom certainty. "Just a question." "No one sent me." She held his gaze steadily. "I placed myself in your orbit voluntarily, 3 years ago. I constructed a resume that would survive your HR process and applied for the most strategically useful position I could access. Senior financial analyst. Adjacent to your schedule, your meeting records, your movement patterns." She paused. "I am a former private intelligence operative. Asset protection and threat assessment, private sector. I left after a contract ended badly in Sao Paulo. I have worked independently since then. He waited. 5 years ago, she continued, because she owed him this much, my brother Dex was 21 years old and had just been charged with something he did not do. The kind of charge that follows a person for the rest of their life. We had no resources, no connections, no one in our corner. The lawyer we could afford told us the evidence wasn't in our favor. She let the pause sit for a moment. Your father intervened. Arthur Pemberton came forward and put his name on the public record. He had no reason to. Dex was nobody to him, but he had been in the room when the testimony against my brother was fabricated, and he knew it, and he said so. The charges were dropped. Alistair was very still. He never asked for anything in return. He never told anyone he had done it. He died 8 months later. Calla looked at the tree line. I tried to simply live with the gratitude, to find another way to honor it. But I was trained to protect assets, and I knew what was coming for you once your father was gone. I knew the landscape of those relationships, the people who had been patient while Arthur was alive. You were operating entirely in the open. You were assuming your reputation was shield enough. She looked back at him. It wasn't going to be enough. So you forged credentials and became my analyst. Proximity is the most effective form of protection. I controlled access to your schedule, your movement patterns, your meeting records. I flagged 12 credible threats in 3 years. She met his eyes. The device in the parkade was the 13th. 13. The numbers landed on him like something structural collapsing. Why didn't you tell me, he said. Even once, after the first time. You would have made me a weapon, she said simply. It's what you do with tools you understand. And weapons get turned on the people holding them. Eventually, I was more useful to you invisible. You trusted my work because you had no reason to question it. The moment you knew what I was, you would have started questioning everything. He recognized the truth of it immediately, could feel the calculation already starting up, even now the instinct to measure her reach and direct it. The fact that he could feel it was its own answer. You terminated my employment, she said. The obligation was discharged. I was leaving tonight. She might have, too, except that Rupert's phone rang 40 seconds later, and the voice on the other end belonged to a contact inside Kell's organization. Not Rupert's contact. She had cultivated him herself and passed the asset to Rupert 6 weeks ago, without explaining why. And the contact said that Kell had a team already moving, not toward the city, here the access road within minutes. Calla told Alistair to stay at the lockup. She said it clearly, the way she used to tell him his 11 o'clock was running long. He didn't listen, she had expected that. What followed in the dark of the conservation road took 8 minutes and left 4 of Kell's contractors face down in the frozen mud, and 2 more retreating north on foot without their phones or their weapons. Calla worked from the tree line without sound. No announcements, no wasted movement, no wasted anything. Alistair understood this later, standing behind the lock-up door where she had told him to stay and he had not stayed, watching through the gap, something he had never had a word for before. He had known dangerous people his entire life. He had never seen anyone move like that in the dark, as though the dark was a condition she had negotiated with long ago and was entirely comfortable inside. Rupert took a graze along his forearm. Calla had him bandaged in 90 seconds with the kit from her jacket, talking to him in the same calm, level tone she'd used to brief him on meeting agendas 3 years running. When it was over and the silence came back, Alistair walked to where she stood at the tree line, looking out into the dark. This makes 3 times, he said. Technically, the maintenance issue in November was also me, she said. So 4. There was also a conversation I redirected in the lobby in February that you were not aware of, and an entry point I closed in the parking structure in August. A pause. 6 total, if we're counting accurately. He exhaled. Something that might in another man have been a laugh. They stood in the cold at the edge of the trees, and Alistair Pemberton looked at her, looked properly, the way he had not managed in 3 years of working 10 feet apart, and saw for the first time who she actually was. Not the grey blazer and the practical boots and the perfectly formatted meeting notes. The woman who had lain on a parkade floor in February to keep him alive, who had driven 40 minutes into the dark and built a perimeter and never said a single word about any of it. I don't want a ghost, he said. The boardroom had gone entirely out of his voice. I spent 3 years not seeing you, and it nearly killed me 6 times. I'm not interested in continuing that arrangement. Calla was quiet for a moment. She looked at him. What are you interested in, Mr. Pemberton? Alistair, he said. After 6 attempts, I think we've earned first names. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, the precursor to one, the structural suggestion of it. "Calla," she said. "I know," he said. "I've known your name for 3 years. I just never said it as though it mattered." The cold had brought color into her face. In the pale ambient light, she looked completely unlike the woman who had sat invisible at a desk 1 floor below him, and entirely, unmistakably, exactly herself. "Kell will reorganize," she said, because she was still thinking 3 steps ahead, because she couldn't stop. "He'll move faster next time and be less careful. You have a window of approximately 72 hours to dismantle his financial architecture before he closes it." "I know," Alistair said, "and I know I can't do it without someone who sees what I can't see, who understands where the threat comes from before it arrives." He held her gaze, steady and direct, perhaps for the first time in the 3 years they had occupied the same building. "I need what you've already been doing. I'd just like you in the room when you do it. At the table, not behind a desk in the corridor." Calla studied him for a long moment. She thought about Dex, about the photograph, about a hospital room and a man still grinning despite everything, about what it had cost and what it had been worth. She thought about Arthur Pemberton, who had put his name on a public record when no one was watching him, and it cost him nothing except the right thing to do, and who had never asked for anything in return. She thought about 3 years of grey blazers and silence, and making herself invisible to the one person she was trying to protect, and how much quieter it had been than she had expected, and how much it had cost her in ways she hadn't fully admitted to herself until this moment. She held out her hand. It was not the gesture of someone accepting a position. It was the gesture of someone entering an agreement between equals, cautious, clear-eyed, without any pretense between them. "I don't fetch coffee," she said. "I'll manage my own coffee. And I'll need real access to the full security architecture, not the associate-level view." "Done." Alistair Pemberton shook her hand. The bare maples stood still around them in the Ontario winter, the city glittering somewhere south beyond the trees, and Calla Trent, who had spent 3 years building a careful, thorough, invisible wall between herself and the world, quietly let it down.